if there are any suggestions from any administrators as far as topics for future webinars, just please email me at my email address. So, ready to go.
Good, good. Thank you, Nick. So as I indicated, I'm going to go through and mute most of you except for Mark. He'll need to speak and listen, and we'll move this forward. And like I said, I'll be watching for your hands, so please feel free to raise them and ask questions. Mark, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, Angie. Can you hear me?
Yep, I sure can. I sure can.
Great.
So go ahead.
And
it's all yours, my friend.
Sure. And the only housekeeping piece is that my internet connection is less than perfect. So if you lose me, that doesn't mean you've lost me for good. It tends to do this thing where it says your connection is lost, and then it'll tell me my connection is found again. So we'll try and work through that. All right. A number of you met, or all of you perhaps have met me before. I was up at LSSU talking to you about a similar topic in terms of using achievement data, specifically the Elevate 360 tool back in August. And really this is a logical follow-on to that presentation, whereby we're going to be talking a lot about how you can best use the student achievement data that you have in your hands and present it to your board. But we're talking about assessment, so this is something I always like to do as a good reminder, and I put it in the form of an assessment, a pop quiz. I made the following statement: with assessment, blank is everything. So what word would you want to put in that blank? And take a look at your 4 choices, and maybe you want to use the hand, or somebody can type in, and Angie will see what you type in. So has anyone raised their hand, Angie? I can't see the hands.
Nope,
raised.
not yet, Mark.
All right. Well, hopefully they can see your screen. And they have 4 choices. With assessment, blank is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Getting any hands? No?
Nope, not yet.
All right. Well, I'm not the kind of teacher.
Oh, wait.
I'll give you some prods.
Emery Wyckoff has his hand up, so I'm going to unmute.
Okay.
Emery, do you think you know the answer to this pop quiz?
Okay, I'm going to be the I'm just going to be brave and say with assessment, rely. Oh, wait. I changed my answer mid-screen. With assessment, I'm going to say integrity is everything.
Oh, with conviction.
With conviction. Emery, that's great. And they're all appropriate answers at some point. But I did expand on this a lot more when we were up there in the summer. Purpose is the one I was looking for, because what I would ask all administrators and all board members to do before they discuss any student assessment is why? What is the purpose of this assessment? Because unfortunately I think the other side of that is too often we talk about student assessment and we haven't asked or answered that question. So we talk about MEP scores in a way that probably isn't useful, and because we haven't asked why are we giving this test. So again, I would just put that out there. Before you give a student any assessment and discuss the results, ask yourself, why did we give this test to this student? Was it to gauge how they're doing compared to other students? Was it to gauge how they're doing relative to state standards? Was it relative to what they're doing this week in class? So always be sure you understand the purpose of the assessment, and that helps tremendously when you get to the other end of actually reporting and discussing the assessment outcomes with your board.
Yep, good.
But you certainly want the others are good answers. They're just not the best answer. You certainly want an assessment to be reliable. You probably should take keep an eye as a school leader on the cost of assessing your students. And of course, assessment integrity or test administration integrity is important as well.
Yeah.
But why?
Mark,
the question is why.
Yeah, just one moment. Rebecca, did you have a thought or response to this pop quiz as well?
Well, I was trying to remember from August whether it was reliability or purpose.
Gotcha.
And I guess in my mind, when presenting to the board, we want to make sure that we're giving reliable results, but obviously in our building, purpose comes first. I agree.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
And that's a great point. So, when I was up there in the summer, we did talk about reliability and validity, and there's a lot of things you need to think about when you're thinking about assessments. But I always recommend that people ask the question why before anything. And it's the most important thing to do is ask, why am I giving this assessment? What's the purpose of the assessment? Is it the appropriate assessment? And all that sort of thing. So good. I just wanted to get that out of the way, and we can carry on to the next slide.
Yep. Good. Yep.
Did it change on your screen? Oh, there we go.
You got it. Yeah. Just a little bit of
So-
delay, probably. Mm-hmm.
There we go. You could probably find a number of different definitions out there. This is one I've taken and I think is meaningful for our discussion today, that it's the process of observing, learning, describing, collecting, recording, scoring, and interpreting information about student learning. Sometimes when people talk about the definition of assessment, they go right down to the etymological roots. And if you've ever looked that up, assessment comes, I believe it's from the Latin, and it means to sit beside. And sometimes people talk about, sitting beside the student and seeing what they're learning, observing the process of learning.
Oh, Mark, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were muted for a minute for some reason. So, okay.
Well, that's unfortunate because I was saying the most important thing that I'm going to say tonight. I guess
Okay.
I should repeat it.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, in all seriousness, the definition of assessment is really fairly basic. The process of observing learning. Incredibly broad statement, but when you think about what assessment is, that really gets down to the root of it. And the thing I was talking about while I was on mute was some people take it even further and look at the etymology, the root of the word assessment, and it comes from the Latin to sit beside. And really thinking about it in that term, sitting beside a student, one teacher, one student, observing what they're learning. At its most basic, that is assessment. We take it a lot further, as you know. And what we're going to be talking about in a little bit are computer adaptive assessments. We're going to be talking about primarily summative assessments. And when we talk about assessments as you express them and you share them with your board, we're certainly talking tonight, and we'll focus on tonight, summative assessments, and the ones that are described or reported at the school level.
Mm-hmm.
There's we could spend hours talking about assessment in other terms. We could talk about a formative assessment, but that's not the focus tonight. The focus is summative assessments at the school level and the ways in which you can share that information in a meaningful way with your board. Then there's the board's role in assessment, and why is a board interested in assessment? Well, they have a commitment to the authorizer. They have signed a contract with their authorizer, and there's goals. And primarily what's described in those goals are assessments and the outcomes of those assessments. So they're asked by the authorizer, how are your students doing? Is the academic program a success? And the primary measure of that is school-level outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, your board has a role, and the way for all of us to work well together is, encouraging honest, transparent reporting. Unfortunately, I've seen it go the other way, where sometimes school leaders have results they'd rather not share because they're not as good as they'd like them to be. A message I'd like to give you tonight, and I actually experienced this. I was at a board meeting. I was presenting student assessment results last night, and we were doing what Jim Collins calls confronting the brutal facts. The results weren't what we wanted, but I could tell by the end of the board meeting, the board was very appreciative that I wasn't holding anything back.
Mm-hmm.
Another part of it is to ensure that when you do have to confront the brutal facts and the assessments don't look the way you'd like them to look, or the outcomes aren't what you'd like them to be, is to certainly have solutions for the board too. So I wouldn't encourage you to present data that isn't positive without having good solutions in place. But as school leaders, you know that. So let's go on to the next slide. So, who's interested? Why does the board care about this as well? Well, there's so many stakeholders out there. that are interested in your assessment results. You're all familiar now with MI School data. I'm sure you've had a lot of fun looking at the citrus-colored accountability scorecard that is out there, the lime greens and the oranges and the yellows. So that's important stuff, and your board needs to be aware and familiar of it, and they're held accountable. There's the top to bottom list, important piece. And there you see in bold something I can't emphasize enough is that your authorizer is interested. The authorizer is interested because they're held responsible as an authorizer to ensure the schools they authorize are meeting the contractual goals. Then there's the media, the parents, the legislators. There's a lot of folks interested. And again, in general, when you're thinking about assessment, what gets shared with those folks? It's summative assessments at the school level. And I would strongly encourage you, particularly with your board, to really keep it at that level. I've seen school leaders dig down into the data with their boards, and we'll talk a little later about why I wouldn't recommend you do that, unless there's a special purpose. All right, let's carry on, Angie.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so presenting the assessment data to the board. This is the big picture where you can see what I'm suggesting is that you use simple, clear pictures. And I don't think there are any board members on the call today.
No.
And I will quite fundamentally use the term dumb it down. And that's not insulting board members. They're not educators. They don't often pretend. Many of them aren't educators, and often are actually turned off by some of the edu-speak that educators use. Strongly recommend that the data you present is in the simplest form possible. Use primary colors. Use simple symbols that they'll get, red and green. On the left, you actually see a sample of a dashboard that comes from a sophisticated engine that actually you can click on the details and drill down into the data. For both achievement and growth. On the right, you see a very simple thing that you could do yourself in an Excel spreadsheet. Either way, keep it simple. The one on the right, you can't see the details there of the bar graph, but it's essentially the local district compared to the charter school compared to a local district compared to the state, I believe, and with proficiency rates. This is on the what you see on the right is a good teacher tool. It's an excellent teacher tool. I know the school leader who uses it. It's a great way to look at data, and you can go, as many of you probably have a lot of tools in your toolkit in terms of discussing data with your staff, and you want to have things such as what you see there, but you don't want to present that at a board meeting. I was at a board meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago, and a wonderful, well-meaning school leader presented about 10 or 15 minutes worth of numbers, and I sat there watching the board members' eyes glaze over, and it wasn't a positive experience for anyone, and it probably had the opposite impact of what the school leader had intended. So keep it simple, nice colors, and if you have a board member that's interested in digging further, invite them to be on a committee where they can chat with you. But in the public meetings, stick to this nice, simple stuff. I'm going to go down to, the next part relates again to your charter contracts. As a Lake Superior State University school, you've got a goal in your contract that says all students will be prepared for college, work, and life. And the way that's measured is achievement and growth. And there's the final bullet there you see on the middle section that says 3+ years. So you've got a tool in your hands called Elevate 360, or many of you do, that analyzes that for you. If you don't yet have that tool, strongly recommend that you do your own data disaggregation and look at that cohort of students who've remained with you. That's what 3+ years is defined as. It's continuous enrollment. Mm-hmm. And that's what your authorizer holds you accountable for, and it's a great discussion to have with your board, with your community. Look what happens when kids stay in our school. And hopefully the data, ideally that data is positive, and if it's not, you need to figure out why and work on it. And we could discuss that a little more later. But, so I'm not going to get into the disaggregated data too much. At another point, we can talk about it. I would recommend that you also, when you're talking to your boards, avoid too much discussion of disaggregated data. I know the bottom 30% discussion has become very important in terms of the new accountability system. You certainly want your board to be aware of that. Everything I'm hearing out there, you might have heard this as well, that there is, there is actually a bill at the state level right now trying to do away with our current accountability system because it's become so complex. I wouldn't spend a lot of your board members' attention or take a lot of their time to understand disaggregated data. That's, again, another thing that's extremely important to do at your school level with your teachers and with your individual students and subgroups, but only in special circumstances where it's really meaningful would I bring that up to a board meeting level in terms of presenting it at a board meeting. All right, moving right along. And again, feel free to stop me anywhere and ask questions or provide feedback. All of you are in the trenches.
Oh. Uh-oh. Mark? 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 Mark?
Hi, I know you lost me for a moment again. Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, okay. Yeah, we lost
So-
you. Yeah, okay. And it's got real staticky all of a sudden, too, so there's a lot of interference. I'm not sure what that's all about, but go ahead.
Yeah, and again, I think it's really just a poor internet connection. I apologize. I
Okay.
will continue though.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
Now, I do hear. I'm hearing that static in the background for the first time as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's much better.
Yep, much better. Okay. Don't know what happened, but
Great.
proceed. Yep, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. This slide really is something encouraging you to emphasize to your board. Use a board meeting where you do have a little extra time, and they're ready for a short lesson on the difference between norm referenced and criterion referenced.
Mm-hmm.
And really, all the board needs to know are what you see on here. Norm referenced is how well students are doing versus other students, and criterion referenced is how well they're doing versus skills, knowledge, and standards. You could do a much longer presentation on that, but if they can understand that distinction, it's critical, because those tests that are extremely important, those summative assessments that you're held accountable for by your authorizer, are generally norm referenced assessments, and the results you get and that are used are norm referenced. While the MEET, the MME, the Coming Smarter Balanced, your local assessments, and others are criterion referenced. I'm sure you know the difference. It's important for the boards to understand the difference in how you use those differences.
Mm-hmm.
You can see I put DIBELS
sorry,
there
Mark.
under both. That's all right. DIBELS is both. Whoop.
I know.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
DIBELS
I got it.
That's all right. DIBELS is a criterion reference test, but they've done a norming, and it can also be described as a norm, or it can be reported out in terms of norms.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an even better reason to understand that there's a difference in terms of how you report data.
Yep.
And again, all the data you get from your contractually required tests, the NWA, the performance series, the Explore, the Plan, those are norm referenced, and your board needs to understand that's how you're doing relative to other students taking the same test.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you know, the criterion reference is how well they're doing compared to the stuff they're learning, and that there's the absolute that they can actually do perfectly on a criterion reference test.
Yep.
Any questions on criterion versus norm reference?
Yeah,
Okay,
Mark, why
see any
don't you?
hands.
Mark, do you want to just pause for a minute, and I will let the participants just take a minute to sort of digest what we've said. If you have questions, use your hand icon. We'll wait just a couple seconds and see if there are any, and then we'll proceed. And I'm not seeing any hands.
All right.
Yep. So, okay, go ahead.
Great. Great. And so I will, just again mention that why is that important, norm reference versus criterion reference? And that goes back to purpose. The MEET test and a state test is designed to tell us how well our students are doing relative to the state standards and now the Common Core state standards under Smarter Balanced. And unfortunately, more often than not, those results are used to compare schools, and ideally that should never be done. And that's an important discussion to have with your board. On the other hand, the NWA or the Performance Series or the Explorer, those are primarily reported out in norm reference, and it's completely appropriate to use a norm reference report to compare yourself to others.
Mark, could you hold on? It looks like Rebecca has a question, so her hand is up. Rebecca, I'm sorry. I see that your hand is up, so go ahead.
I think there was a delay.
Sure.
That's okay. I'm just wondering, when our ISD presented the new criteria for qualifying for special ed services, one of those was that a norm reference test was needed, and Scantron was not on that list. Do you have any idea why that would not be true? Or is there any difference in their mind, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure which ISD you're with. Scantron is considered a norm reference. Sometimes they call themselves a standards reference test. It maybe they're just not familiar with it. Scantron is less, NWEA over the past half dozen years has really become the test of choice in a lot of areas and is very well known, as are a number of paper and pencil. So it could just be that they're not familiar with it. And if they, it certainly has good norms. They've published their norming studies, and if they, I think you could probably talk them into it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks, Rebecca.
That's a good question. So what you've got here are simple descriptions. Again, all of you use one or the other of these two assessments. One of the things I encourage you to do is educate your boards on the assessment so they better understand it, because often just the name doesn't mean much to them. And what you've got there, I've provided you with links, and again, you're going to be getting this presentation sent to you. Just every testing company is now at the point where they're providing really good one-page handouts. And I would encourage you, once a year probably, or if you've got new board members, because they're going to be hearing you and seeing you present this data, and sometimes we're so familiar with it, we forget that they're not. So, let them have that in their back pocket. Give them a handout, give them a one-pager or a nice pamphlet on these. They do generally appreciate that, and sometimes they actually read it. So those are good references there to encourage you. ACT in particular has developed a lot of really, really good material that's very board friendly. So I encourage you to go and take a look at that stuff. Carrying on?
Yep.
To the next slide.
Yep, it should be coming, Mark.
Right. Yep, okay. So we looked at, again, the performance series and MAP and so on. Here you have the criterion reference tests. I very consciously put MEEP and MME in small type. You're all aware that it's very likely they've taken the MEEP test for the last time, and that they will be taking the MME for the last time this spring, and that come 2015, we'll all be taking a test called the Smarter Balanced Assessments, part of the SBAC, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. And many of you may be involved in the pilot right now or this year. So if you're going to talk about state assessments, and hopefully you have begun speaking to your boards about what's coming, you hear me hesitating a little bit. You're all probably familiar with that we had an exciting summer where there was a pause placed on the implementation of both the Common Core state standards and the Smarter Balanced. If I had to go one way or the other, I would suggest that we're much more likely to see the Smarter Balanced be implemented in Michigan, but I wouldn't bet a whole paycheck on it. I'd bet maybe a week. That we will see the Smarter Balanced implemented in Michigan in 2015. And so with that said, if I were in your position, I would be preparing the ground for your with your board, giving them, again, as you see what I've done there is I've provided you with a document, a one-pager that I think is a good starter for boards, and it's another organization. They've actually got lots of federal money to work with, and they've been preparing some really top-notch materials to share. So that's out there for you. I don't know if there's any questions. One of the things I would definitely speak to your boards about is the fact that because you're a school that's already been using a computer adaptive assessment like Performance Series or MAP, that your students are particularly well prepared. There are not many schools out there that haven't been using computer adaptive, computer delivered assessments, and I think they are at a distinct disadvantage to the schools that have been doing it for years, as you have. All right.
Yep.
All right, we're switching gears here a little, and we're going to talk about ways in which you look at the
Mark, we lost you again. Mark. Mark, are you back?
I'm back. I took a deep breath.
Okay. Okay, good.
You seem to be very short lapses. It's very interesting. But
Yeah,
we'll just keep
right.
going.
Okay, yeah, just proceed.
So, again, achievement and growth. And, it's very important that we not say, this is something I learned over a long period of time. We used to talk a lot about how important growth is, to the point that we said growth had primacy and was the most important thing. A lot of experience came to bear to help me understand that both achievement and growth are extremely important to discuss and measure and report. And primarily because when you focus only on growth, you often find yourself with groups of students that don't achieve the levels, the outcomes that you hope for them. Even though the growth may be good, perhaps not great. So anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit. So what tests or types of tests measure achievement primarily? Those would be more your MME, your status measures, your criterion referenced, while growth is better measured by your norm reference tests. However, the ones you use can measure both. And really, again, as it says, so many students in the schools that you serve come in behind grade level, and if there for a long time, and I actually was somewhere at a meeting, a state level meeting the other day, where someone said, as long as you get a year worth of learning for a year worth of instruction, and that's been the mantra from many people for many, many years. However, in the charter school world, we learned that if we're satisfied with 1 year of learning for 1 year of growth, and we're 1 year of learning for 1 year of instruction, and many of our students are well behind, they never catch up. And that's why it's important to focus on both growth and sufficient growth to reach a meaningful achievement level. Good. So let's, carrying right on. And it's just taking its time. Well, you can click again. Thank you. This is an old school, you can see the date on those, the dates. This is a really old school look at achievement versus growth. And it's still meaningful. So what you see is a trend on the, I'm not sure if it's a MEP test that was being used here. Yes, it was the MEP test. And the red line represented a school's achievement. So snapshots in time every year. And the last 3 years, you can see in that trend, they seem to be going in the right direction. But however, you see in comparison to a local district and a state, even though they're doing well and they're following those trends, they're still low. They're consistently low and below a local district and a state district. On the other hand, if you look at the bottom chart, that chart shows growth from fall to spring. And there's a little thin blue line down the middle, which was a national norm for growth. And I think it's a particular grade level. But the bottom, what I'm trying to show is that that school, although on an achievement basis, was consistently low performing and below a local district and a state, in growth they were near the top of the scale. So they're two different things to look at. Now, we're going to click again.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to see one of the problems is that if you focus only on achievement, and you'll probably all know this and you'll remember or you have heard the term focusing on the bubble kids, achievement tends to focus people on the low-hanging fruit, and you've got assessments such as the MEET or the MME or the Smarter Balance that give you performance levels, and you focus on those students that you can get into the proficient range. And any number of school improvement consultants will actually advise you to do that. But as you can see, and that will get you a quick payoff, but effective schools know that you've got to look at all students and where they are and that they all need to grow. So that's why growth is at least as important as achievement.
And that's what boards need to understand, right, Mark? So the purpose of this screen is not necessarily to, provide boards with all of this detail, but to help them understand the difference between the two and why it's important to measure both.
Correct. Great. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay.
So that was the old school view. The new school view is this tool called Elevate 360, and that's what I spoke to a number of you about this past summer in the Sioux. And these are some sample slides, and what you see here are actually two views. One is achievement on the top, and the other is growth. You actually see it over time as well, and you've got this particular school only had 3 years of data. And although the achievement levels only in the final year are at an acceptable level in terms of the contract, that these students are now ready for college, work, and life, or the 95% certainty that they're at that level, somewhere near that level. You can see the growth at this particular school each year was stronger than the achievement. But it required that strong growth to bring students that are below level up to an achievement level that is preparing students for college, work, and life. And that's really the essence of Elevate 360. You're looking at both achievement and growth, and the view of growth is for all students. Are all students growing at a pace that after a reasonable amount of time, like 3 years, will bring them to a level that they are on pace to be college ready?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions about Elevate 360? Takes, I've got one slide here. It takes quite a bit of time to really grasp and understand. If you're one of, I think there's, maybe Nick can pipe in here. I believe there's still 6 schools that are piloting it.
So I'm going to unmute Nick right now. So Nick, you're unmuted. If you want to speak to Elevate 360 and how you're using Elevate 360 from an authorizer's perspective to really measure those contractual goals and that achievement, this might be a good time for that if you feel so compelled.
Okay. Yes, we have 6 schools that are going through the mid-contract reviews this year, and then we have 8 next year. And we are looking very closely at Elevate 360 and how these scores or how these schools stand up on this particular chart for the achievement and the growth. The new schools that'll be going through the mid-contract review next year, I'll be contacting them probably after 1st of December because they're bringing in a new program for the Elevate 360. But with the state looking at more closely the student achievement, growth, and performance, we're naturally going to be looking at this particular tool as one of the main areas for us to make decisions as far as the performance of the academies. So,
Good.
All right. Great.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
okay.
What you see here on this slide in front of you is a relatively simple graph, and it actually does say in the bottom right-hand corner for illustrative purposes only. There are a number of tools and graphs like this that you can share with your board, and I would encourage you as school leaders to spend time getting to know and understand how this tool measures achievement and what it's trying to measure and how it's trying to display it. And then again, use only the simplest pictures possible, because it's a fairly complex subject. But generally, we find that board members did understand that there's a trajectory. If you backward map, people generally understand that 21, if you explain the research behind it, is a high level. Believe it or not, some of you who have kids off to college know that 21 is maybe not as high as you wanted, but on average, most schools aren't hitting the 21 most high schools aren't hitting the 21 as now.
Mark, hopefully you can hear me. We lost you again. So we'll just give you a couple minutes to regroup. Are you back?
I'm back.
Okay.
I'm back.
Okay.
So again, just to spend I'm going to spend one more minute on this line here, and it's essentially the blue dots are a backward map from that 21, meaning that if the student remains on this, they're on track, and it goes all the way back to second grade then with either the performance series or the map. And does that mean a student will, if they're on that track, they will stay on it? No, they may go more vertically to a higher level. If they're below it, you know how far they are off track. And one of the important things to understand with this is that if students remain off track for any period of time, it gets harder and harder to get them on track. And I don't mean that with individual students. I mean, research shows that following students longitudinally, the students who are in 8th and 9th grade that aren't at those levels have a very, very difficult time to get on track. So that's why it's important to start looking at this data as early as possible and to help students get on track. All right.
Good.
Anyway, enough said about that slide.
Okay.
So you've got your Elevate 360. You might have your simple NEAT chart. You've presented your data extremely effectively to your board. And ideally, if you've got a good board that really cared and listened to what you said, they're going to ask you, now what? So we understand what our students are. Maybe, as I mentioned earlier, some brutal facts that you've presented in terms of where you stand in terms of growth and achievement. And what you've done is you've done your homework, and you're able to respond to the now what question with really meaningful solutions. And that's going to be different for each one of you, depending on what your data shows. But the message I'm trying to share here is be extremely clear, transparent, keep it simple for your boards, keep a focus on and an eye on your charter contract, because that that defines your existence. And when your data is such that you are not where you want to be, share that solution. All right. So the next one.
Ready?
Is I'm just going to. Yep. So I'm going back to the beginning now. Assessment defined the process of observing learning. So if those observations have informed you that there's less learning occurring than desired, then you must act. Right? But act on what? And I'm going to give a shameless plug for a resource that I find to be a good one. Some of you might be already using it. I'd love to hear feedback this evening. It's not a new resource. It's a few years old now. Go ahead.
I did. You should be seeing it, Mark.
Great. All right. So there's a pretty simple formula that has been determined, and you can argue with it, but I'd like to hear your arguments. But essentially, if you want to improve student learning, you've got to get to the instructional core. And the instructional core is defined as the interaction between the student, the teacher, and the content. So you have to change one of those things, and when you change one, you actually have to change the other. So the example of that, if you're not getting the results you want, you don't keep doing the same thing. You need to find out what to do differently. And if what you need to do differently is change the content or the curriculum, you can't just change that. You have to help your teachers with professional development to address that new curriculum. Mm-hmm. And a good way of doing that and impacting it and understanding how to see that change through is this resource here called Instructional Rounds. Mm-hmm. And again, I've heard lots of positive feedback from people who've implemented the concept of using instructional rounds in their school. It delivers a really collaborative atmosphere within the school where your entire staff feel like they're in it together in that continuous improvement mode. It comes from the healthcare industry where when you think of a group of physicians doing surgical rounds in a ward, it's the same type of idea where you're actually going and discussing best practices as colleagues. So again, a strong plug for a resource. I get no commission on this. I'd love to see if there's any hands up if anybody else is familiar with it or has practiced instructional rounds. Pipe in now.
Yep, just give them a couple seconds to raise their hands, Mark. I would offer two while we're waiting to see if any hands go up. Mark touched a little bit upon professional development, and again, that's probably the good takeaway for this slide from the board's perspective. So I think it's oftentimes incumbent upon the school leader, school administrator to help the boards understand that sometimes the financial resources dedicated to professional development are absolutely necessary. So again, connecting that piece to the boards and the finances, just being sure that the board is willing to support those, professional development opportunities relative to either how you're approaching assessments in your school, and then certainly in the spirit of what we're talking about today, where those outcomes might need to be improved.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I don't see any hands, so okay, good.
Point.
We
All
will
right,
proceed.
good. So we'll just go on to our summary here.
Wow, we're done. Okay, good.
So, just to wrap up, the takeaways are, first of all, it's not even on here, but again, when it comes to student assessment, always make sure you've asked the question why, and you're using your assessments for the right reasons. Be transparent, keep it simple, speak in the board's language. I can't say enough how important it is to not try and wow them with a lot of numbers and a lot of graphs and charts. Keep it really simple. They'll appreciate it. And you as school leader need to know your data better than anyone else. And if what you're doing, if presenting your data is an exercise in confronting the brutal facts, be prepared with those now what answers. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you have them. I'm sure you're all working on efforts to continuously improve student achievement and figure out a good way of presenting that to your board to answer the questions. Mm-hmm. All right, and that might lead to a future topic in terms of what are effective practices to address student achievement data that isn't where you want it to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'll offer two, and then again, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mark. I was just
going to say I left some time for questions, but
yeah. Yep, and I'll offer too, and Nick might speak to this as well. In addition to an administrator webinar series, LSSU is also has developed and will be delivering a board webinar series. So the first board webinar series for this school year directly corresponds to what we're talking about this evening, and it's really the board's role in interpreting assessment data. So we'll be delivering that next week. So hopefully that will be helpful to the board, helpful to you as you continue to work through the best way to present assessment outcomes to your respective boards. So again, while we're waiting for questions, I'm going to unmute Nick. And Nick, if you want to maybe talk a little bit about the future, webinars, and then certainly add anything to what we've talked about this evening.
Angie, your audio is getting a little difficult to understand, so I don't know if I'm the only one who's having that problem or others are.
Okay.
But we are going to be having future webinars coming up. The next one will be in January, and it's going to be developing future plans. And as Mark had mentioned, you're looking at changing your curriculum or you're changing your structure, and professional development is so important. So this would be one of those areas as far as developing your plan for the future in upcoming years, as far as putting professional development and other activities to help your teachers improve those achievement scores. I'd like to thank everybody who did participate tonight. I'd like to thank Mark and Angie for putting this on. I really appreciated it. And as I said, if you have any other topics that you'd like to have presented in a webinar, just please email me. Thank you.
Good, good. Thank you, Nick. I apologize for some of the connection challenges we had. That's the nature of technology oftentimes. But again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to just raise your hand and I will unmute you to ask. So again, we'll just give a couple more minutes and then we'll conclude the session for this evening. Okay. Very good. I'm not seeing any hands go up. I will offer that if you do have questions after this evening, if you want to email them to me, I can certainly get them forwarded to Mark and we can get them answered. And again, the webinar has been recorded and will be posted on LSSU's website. So, Mark, did you have something you wanted to add?
Sure. I would. The last thing I would say is to the school leaders on the call, share with each other. Some of you, I'm sure, are presenting really great stuff to your boards, and others might be able to make use of the same templates or spreadsheets. So if you've got some really good practices, be a good colleague and send them around to your charter school network and let them make use of them.
Good. Good. Thank you, Mark. And thank you all for participating, and we look forward to, well, I'm not sure if Mark will be involved in future webinars. So thank you and have a great evening.